All right. Well, so for starters, let me just take a couple minutes. So obviously, I'm guessing most of you saw the emails that came out from the president, money problems, blah, blah, blah. Um, you're going to be fine here. Ann Arbor is having some significant issues. Um, there's history to that about a decade ago or so when um, I've been here for a while. So so it was sometime roughly that um, Ann Arbor were one of those campuses under Lutheran Church Missouri Synod. So they were their own campus, we're our own campus, and they were probably going to have to close their doors back then. Mequon's the biggest Concordia. So the Synod asked us to kind of absorb them and keep them afloat. So call it mission based. Well, back then, higher education, everything was going pretty well. Money was flowing in, blah, blah, blah. Obviously with COVID and changing higher ed, things aren't as good as they used to be. So what used to be maybe, I don't want to somewhat of a mercy type acquisition is probably pulling on us a little bit too much now. So we'll see what the president says he wants to do. But I think the major issue is going to be over in Ann Arbor. You might have some staff cuts here or something like that for underperforming programs that have one or two majors or something, but computer science, there's not going to be any issue. So the computer science is the most profitable program across both campuses. More so in the grad program. Undergrad, we're probably in the top 3 or 4, but you're going to be fine is the punchline. There is a meeting, I think the president called for tomorrow in the chapel at 3 p.m. Where he's going to give an update and let you ask questions. So I encourage you to go to that, ask your questions, if you have concerns, whatever. But I just wanted to give you an update from a Mequon campus perspective. So, keep the Ann Arbor campus and their students, faculty, staff in your prayers, because obviously there's going to be some issues there, and that's unfortunate, but it's not going to impact you here, let's say yet, but presumably never if the drain kind of disappears or we come up with a little bit better way of managing some of the stuff. All right. So let's see. Homework assignment. Allow the player to move between the exits with the key press. And I always started doing that. Make the player face in the direction they're going to move. Player should enter the room opposite where they came in from. And we want them to stop in the middle of the room so they can kind of like, let's start again, right? So let's see where we left off. Okay, so we kind of have that guy doing its thing. But what we don't want it to do is we don't want it to be able to angle down to other exits. We want him to get to the center of the room, and then he's allowed to press stuff. All right, so one other thing related to the midterm. So what I think I'm going to do is the midterm I'll probably put up sometime early-ish next week. We'll talk about it maybe Friday. But it'll be online and you just have to have it in by midnight Friday or something like that before you leave for spring break. That way I can grade it over the weekend. Then we're away for spring break for a week. I actually will not be back for that Monday and that Wednesday following spring break. But what I'll do is I'll record the lectures for that and just make sure you watch the lectures and do the homework. And then I'll be back that Friday. So what I'll probably end up doing is after class on Friday, right before spring break, I'll probably just keep recording for 2 more sessions. So I make sure I pick up where we left off and keep going. but we'll burn that bridge when we get to it. But if you wanted to mark down that we won't be meeting physically on the Monday following spring break or the Wednesday following spring break, you could do that, but there'll still be lectures up and there'll still be assignments, unfortunately, or fortunately, depends on how you want to look at it. All right, so let's deal with how do we handle the guy hitting the middle of the room first? Okay, we're probably going to put some kind of trigger in there, right? You know, something for him to bump into that we can kind of make him stop heading in that direction. So let's go and look at our code and let's remind ourselves how he's getting his movement going now and that stuff. So we'll look at the player controller here. So the player controller inside of, well, for starters, we decide where we want to put them. So this first part here, when the script spawns, remember inside of our singleton, our current direction starts off as a question mark when our game first launches. So the very first time that the player script launches on the very first scene, we actually will not get into this if statement because we haven't actually started moving yet. Okay. The second time that this guy launches, when we load our scene for the for the second time, all right, then we'll come in here and we'll say, well, okay, if you were going to the north, we're going to position you at the south. So you're coming in from the correct exit. If you were going to the south, we'll position you at the north, so on and so forth. So this moves our player to the correct entry point on our scene. So he's coming in from the right place. All right. So that's what that code does. Inside of update, this is where we're handling the arrow pushes. So each time through update, we're going to say, hey, did you press the up arrow, down arrow, left, right? We also have this thing about whether or not you're currently moving. All right, because what we want to not have happen is we don't want them to be able to change directions, you know, like start going left and then turn to the right or something like that. Once they pick a direction, they hit the arrow, they're going that direction. All right, doesn't matter how many more times we press the key here. Okay, so and let's see, where do we? Okay, so then after we've selected the key, we set some variables. We say that we are going to be moving. We turn on the exits. That way the exits have their collision boxes because they're exits by default. We wrote a couple of functions here. We have turn off exits. We have turn on exits. And when the script first starts, we turn off all the exits. That's because we are placing our player by one of the exits and we don't want them to collide with that box right at the beginning. We want it to be collidable once we start moving from the center of the room. Then we want to have those guys turned on. All right, so we had a couple of functions to turn on and off those guys. All right, so after we pick a key, we'll set that we are moving. We'll turn on the exit so we have something to bump into. We'll set the current direction to the direction we should be heading to, and then we'll turn our guy to look at that exit. So he's facing in the correct way. All right. So now if we do that, if we think about update getting called multiple times in a row here, notice our if statement. It says if I press the up arrow over and over again, we press the up arrow and we're not moving. So we only are going to ever respond to these if statements if we're not currently moving. So as soon as one of them gets us going, we are at that point not moving. Okay. So keep in mind that am moving starts off as false. So every single time a new scene loads, our this.am moving variable will be false. All right. So just because he was moving on the current scene, as soon as he bumps into one of our exits and we launch a brand new scene, from the code's perspective, he's no longer moving because now he has a new version of that variable. Make sense? All right. So that was one problem several people ran into. Let's see. So when we first come into the room, we'll turn off the exits. That way he can enter the room, so on and so forth. At the second half of update here, this is where we actually make the player move in a certain direction. And this is where we're having him move towards something using his current position, where we want him to go, and then the speed over time. So kind of keep in mind that every single frame, he's going to kind of be nudging in that direction. I think we had done this without delta time at the beginning, where I just kept pressing the button and we saw him kind of blipping forward a little bit. All right, so effectively what we're looking at here is like the old animation flip book, just loading a whole bunch of, it's every frame, it's making a little tiny update, and then we experience it as these things are moving on the screen. Okay, so right now our move in a current direction is completely based on, so every single update, even if we assume that we didn't press any of these keys, every single frame we're going to be asking the question, are we moving in a current direction? If it's north, we want to keep going that direction. All right, make some sense? All right. So what we needed, and notice here that we only go in that direction if we're going north, south, west, or east. Which means that if we happen to have our current direction set to something other than those, we won't be pushing him in that direction anymore. Make some sense? So you kind of want to start thinking about how can we short circuit his movement to get him to stop. Maybe when he hits something in the middle of the room, how do we get him to stop moving? Maybe you tell him he's no longer moving north, south, east, or west, something like that. So let's get that into play here. So we'll zoom in on Chomp. All right, he's currently at the middle of the room. Oh, I already put a middle of the room there. Okay. So here's our middle of the room. It's set up as a trigger. We tagged it as middle of the room. All right. So now when we, that guy's going to stay on. So let's go into our code here. So on trigger enter, we now have two different things that could happen. If what we bumped into was the door, we're going to load our new scene. If instead what we bumped into is the middle of the room and we are currently heading in some direction. So the very first time he's going to instantly bump into it, but we're not going to do anything to him. But if he's currently heading north, for example, what we're going to do is we print it out. He's at the middle of the room. And we'll set that equal to true in case we need that. And then what we probably want to do is change his current direction to something other than north, south, east, or west. We can set it back to a question mark if we want, or if we want to kind of have some kind of notion whether or not we are moving in a certain direction, or whether this is the first time through or future times through. Maybe we go ahead and we set this guy equal to maybe middle. All right, so if we set it equal to middle, that is going to be something that's not north, south, west, or east. So the next frame, we won't be pushing him in any direction. Make some sense? He'll still be facing in the correct direction where he came into the room. Okay, but you won't be pushing him in any of those directions. All right. And then we probably, that gets set to false. The am moving is false by default. So we'll say that's good enough for now. All right. Let me just make sure this guy is enabled. He is. So go ahead and hit play here. So first time through, we didn't do anything special. We're going to go ahead and have him come in the room. He stopped there. Why did he stop there? Oh, he's colliding with it over and over again. Did I save everything here? Let's look at update. I didn't press any arrow, so none of these won't get into any of those things. his current direction is going to be north, south, east, or west. So let's say it's north. We're definitely getting into this guy. I'm going to put a else here. I'm going to print whatever that, letting us know that we got into the else there. That thing we collided with, I just want to know that are we colliding with something or not. Go ahead and run this again. Okay, so right now we're seeing that he's collided with something that we don't want to respond to a couple times. Not a problem at that point. He comes into the room. Okay, so now he's collided with something else. So what did he bump into? Is he bumping into the floor or something? Just for the moment, I'm going to quickly test that by elevating him extra. Nope, still bumping into something. Oh man, is it that bottom jaw? Man, he is unnerving, isn't he? Woo! So I'm not gonna sleep tonight. All right, let's see what's going on here. As he is bumping into something. Oh, difficult to watch. All right. So let's see what is right here that he might be bumping into. So we have that guy's just a transform. That's the floor, also just a transform. Where's our collision box? Exits. This will be the south one, right? Okay, so that is what he's bumping into. And that's set up as a trigger. When this scene first loads, we're turning that off though, right? Start, turn off exits. If we're not heading in one of these directions, position them in the right place. That's all fine and good. So we see he's getting positioned correctly. On trigger enter, this thing should be turned off, and it was, because we see this thing spit out, not you're loading another scene. Just to ensure that it's not happening before we know it. Loading scene, save that. Let's just make sure it's not accidentally trying to load that scene. I still think he seems like he's bumping into something else. Yeah, he is. Oh, wait, no, wait. He might not be, because it only loaded the scene one time, right? No scene is loaded. Now it's loading scene. Okay, yeah. So only loaded scene once when he hit up here. He got down here, so we're not reloading the scene. He bumped into a couple of things, but he stopped moving. So let's go and look at the code that makes him move. All right, because I think we're not doing anything here that's a problem. We're certainly not at the middle of the room. They're just for completeness. We just put in middle here. Make sure it doesn't think he's hitting the middle of the room there. If I have my collider set up funny. Loading. He is hitting the middle of the room. But why? How big is that collision box? How is he hitting that? hitting that? We'll make sure it happens in all the different directions. There's not just something funny with the south. Okay, no, it's always hitting it. I think he's hitting middle. Let me make sure I didn't. So that's a door, that's a door, that's a door, that's a door. That's the middle of the room. So when he gets right here, he's colliding with the middle of the room. But why? Just turn that off for a second. Okay. Also, that is the guy he's bumping into. Just shrink the box, the collision box down to like basically nothing. Oh, still hitting it. Let me try this. Let's elevate that box a little bit. How big is Chomp's collision box? Here's his sphere collider. We can, if we click on edit collider, yeah, that's not that big. Anybody have the same thing happen to them? Oh, well, let's just keep going down the rabbit hole then. That is funky, right? Yeah, I mean, because debugging is part of the learning experience, right? I mean, that's okay. I have a theory. Ooh, is he bumping into like a floor rock or something? Let me turn the floor off here. It's not the floor. All right. Let's turn the archways off. All right. The exits are still there. We just don't have the geometry from the archways. What'd you do? There is no geometry available there now. Okay, there are invisible exits. He's not in any of that. Okay, so we can turn all that back on. That's not the problem. Okay. Chomp is set up as a collider. We have our player script. We see that it's getting right here because the thing it bumped into has a tag of middle of the room, and that's what we called it, right? And he is not heading in the nothing direction the very first time. The room. I guess I'm wondering, why is it even getting into on trigger enter? Because when we first came into our room here, start, we turned off all the exits. So as soon as it loads, we turn all the exits off. And even if he was running into the exit, it wouldn't be telling us middle. The only way it can get to this print statement is if the thing we hit is middle of the room and we're not going, and we're going in some direction. For semicolons or anything in weird spots. What is the trigger he's hitting? All right. Just for, I don't know, whatever, I am gonna make a new middle of the room. We'll tag this guy middle of the room. We'll add a box collider to that guy. We'll set it as a trigger. And he is his own, wait a minute. Yeah, he's his own thing. He's not a child of anything. So there's nothing weird with how he entered the room. But it thinks that he just hit middle. We do this. Print other dot. Is that going to give us any sort of? Let's just print out the tag. Every single time we hit something, let's print out the tag. See what he slammed into. All right, he bumped into something. Let's run that again. All right, so now he's there. And now we're gonna run him. So here he hit the door. We loaded the scenes. The very next thing after he hit this and we loaded the scene is it said, oh. Anybody have a theory yet? Go ahead.
It as it's loading right before it turns.
Yeah. Before we move him, he is sitting in the middle of the room. He loads in the middle of the room. So he is colliding with the middle of the room. And then before our eyes even see it, we're repositioning him. So right here, it's in start, right? So up here in start, yes, we're turning off the exits, but he is still sitting in the middle of the room right now. Even if it's for a frame, right? Not until we get to the if statement do we shift him. Okay, so even though we're not visibly seeing it, he is, let's see, can we do it before anything loads? Well, so the thing we can do here is this. We can set the, oh, sorry. I'm going to turn middle of the room off by default. All right. And now I'm going to add that in as a game object we can programmatically control. And what we'll do is as he's hitting after the scene load, we'll turn it back on after those if statements, after we shift them. Okie dokie. So we need to make him available here. Public, game object, middle of the room. And then we'll go ahead and write the code for that here. So after we, in fact, we can actually, then we don't even have to deal with it the first time in. We'll say this dot middle of the room dot set enabled, set active to true. So only after we've repositioned him, then we'll turn it back on. So that he has the opportunity to slam into it later. All right. So now I need to make that guy available to my script. So that's chomp here. Now it's expecting a middle of the room. We'll drag that guy in. Shouldn't be hitting it now. I did save this, right? So middle of the room starts off inactive. We ask our question, regardless of where we positioned him. After he's positioned, then we're going to set it, turn it back on so he can run into it then. But now he's already in a new place in the room, presumably. So is he still clipping it? Is the time it takes it to change the position? Is that happening asynchronously where then he's bumping into this? So let me not turn that back on. Make sure he doesn't hit. He obviously should not hit now. That doesn't solve our real problem. Okay, so the scene loads. He is right here. We currently have the thing disabled. We change his location. And then we turn it back on so he can hit the middle of the room here. This works if this happens instantaneously. So if we're heading north, do this, south, do this. We have it defaulted to being off, but maybe he's not actually turned off at the time that the script starts. He's hitting something untagged. Wonder what that is. Yeah, that guy doesn't have any collider. So actually, I should be able to turn him on here since I'm now programmatically turning him off. Print. Turned off. Turned on. Let's make sure that these things don't get collided. All right, so here it's turned off, but we don't turn it back on the very first time through. That's fine because he wasn't heading in a direction. So now we'll head in a direction. We loaded the scene. We turned it off. Then we turned it back on. And then it said he hit the middle of the room. So as soon as we turned it back on, the first thing it said he hit was the middle of the room. This has to be what's going on. But why isn't this solving it? That's why I was seeing, is he a child of something? Because like maybe the middle of the room is getting drug along with Chomp. I guess let me put it way up here at the top. I mean, it shouldn't make any difference having it there, but just as a whatever. You know, because if it was a child of Chomp, then he would be dragging the middle of the room along with him. Then it would make some sense. That has to be it. Here, I think we can test this. Unity, call it sleep. Okay, so we can do a coroutine. So let's just test this for the sake of testing this. So let's go in here and then I'll explain what a coroutine is. So I'm going to write a function here called turn on middle. And it's got to be something called a I enumerator. And then we'll start that coroutine. So a coroutine is like launching a thread. It's like creating its own thread. So we'll go ahead and start the coroutine called turn on middle. And we'll put this in there. Okay. And we got to put our weight in there. So at the end of a coroutine, we always have to return null. Right. But now I want him to wait. Okay, wait to call the coroutine. Maybe that's the better way of doing it. Unity coroutine delay. Okay, this should do it. I'm gonna have him wait 2 seconds. Well, have him wait 1 second. All right. So we'll start this coroutine, which spins up a thread and starts it. I'll then put that there. And it's going to wait for 1 second. So this is not going to block. This is just like our threads we looked at in Java. This won't block, which means that our guy can enter the room and start going. After 1 second, we'll turn the middle of the room back on. If this is the problem, that hopefully is enough time for him to get past the I don't know, hitting it before we move him. Man, that is weird. Does it take that long to move something? So that was the solution. So the issue here is that this guy here, transforming him at a position, is taking time. So if we just turn on the middle of the room, set it active right away, this guy has not finished moving yet. He hasn't gotten to his destination at like the south entrance. So when a game first starts, you have him at the center. So we can work around this by not positioning him at the center initially, moving him to the center the first time when it's a question mark. Otherwise, we'd be moving him from a different place where he's not going to accidentally bump into the center of the room. But man, doesn't that look like a primitive action saying set your transform to a new position? Why doesn't that happen atomically? Try something here. Yield return. Let's see if this also fixes it. Oh, won't let me yield there. All right. So we were going to introduce coroutines at a point anyways. I would say, though, that this is bad programming practice. Let me explain why here in our last couple of minutes. So, and this is actually kind of a history lesson to old programs. And so when I was a kid, there was a game in the arcades when they existed called Double Dragon. Anybody heard of the 8-bit Double Dragon game? So big hit in the arcades, blah blah blah. Well, finally it came out for PC on floppy disks. so we had it on our old Intel x86. This was like bleeding edge stuff. Well, several years later, I got a IBM DX2 66 megahertz machine, a way faster machine than that old one, but basically it was a machine that doesn't move at all compared to today's computers. And the game was unplayable on there because the way they handled pauses is with busy wait loops. So on that old computer, if they had a for loop that just span up, what did something a million times, it takes time to do something a million times. But it took more time to do it a million times on the slower processor than it did on the faster processor. So they were effectively handling pauses by just sitting there writing loops that ran through some number of times, hoping that was a good amount of time to wait. So what we're doing here is creating a thread, turning it on, and then telling the guy, wait 1 second. But that's us saying we hope 1 second is enough to get him out of the way of the middle of the room, but not too long that he gets back to when he should hit the middle of the room. So we're kind of having to play with fire with time. I would say almost always that's bad programming practice. It's fascinating to me. I'm going to look into that a little bit because I want to know why this is not happening. Why does this not block? This gets back to our lesson about blocking code versus non-blocking code. This code definitely doesn't block because we've purposely created a thread and told that thread to start. That's what threads do. When we want to have more than one thing happening at once, we create a thread and that's what they do. Well, this guy is not happening in a thread. Start is not multi-threaded. By all accounts, this guy looks like he is a blocking line of code, where I will not get to the next line of code until that guy finishes. Yet that is clearly not the case because we are getting to the next line of code. Okay. Well, so let me look into that. I'll come back with a better answer on Wednesday. I won't give you more homework. If you want to make some updates to your code from that was due today and resubmit it for Wednesday, that's fine. I'll hold off to grade them until after that. But yeah, that is fascinating to me. Huh. I mean, it was fun to debug and finally it gave me an excuse to introduce coroutines, but it still doesn't make sense. And I don't like when something doesn't actually explain itself. Because then you're just playing with fire and saying, oh, it worked. And that's the thing I tell you not to do, right? Don't just keep changing code until it finally functions. All right. So I'll look into that and figure out what's going on, and I'll give you the punchline on Wednesday. Yeah, I'll update the code. Yeah.
Did you so I've got everything working. but
I was able